The shell slammed into the Tiger just after dawn, and for a fraction of a second, no one inside understood what had happened. It was 6:40 a.m. on January 14th, 1945, near the small East Prussian village of Liski. Snow covered the fields in a hard white crust. The sky was gray. Frost clung to the turret of a German Tiger, one from Schwere Panzerabteilung 505. Its five-man crew had survived months of fighting and believed they were nearly untouchable at long range.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.
Their 88mm KWK-36 gun had destroyed dozens of Soviet tanks before those tanks could even fire back. Then the entire world inside the Tiger turned white. A Soviet 122mm armor-piercing shell, fired from more than 1,500 meters away, smashed into the thick frontal armor with a force the crew had never felt before. The impact was so violent that the gunner was thrown against his side. The loader's ears rang. The commander gripped the cupola hatch and stared in disbelief. Even before the smoke cleared, they understood something terrifying. The enemy had hit them first, and it was not a T-34. Somewhere beyond the frozen tree line, hidden behind drifting snow and the black skeletons of shattered pines, an IS-2 heavy tank had opened fire. For years, German tank crews had been taught that Soviet armor was dangerous in numbers, but often weak in individual duels. They respected the T-34, but many veterans still believed a well-handled Tiger could defeat any Soviet tank if it saw the target first. That belief began to die the moment the first 25-kilogram shell came screaming across the winter battlefield. You can almost feel the silence inside the Tiger after the hit. No one speaks. As the commander scans through his Zeiss optics, searching for the source, the driver waits for orders. The loader, his hands shaking, reaches for another PZGR-39 shell. The gunner tries to keep his eyes steady on the sight, but his breathing has changed. For the first time in a long time, they are afraid. The Soviet IS-2 was not merely another tank. It was a message, a warning, a brutal answer to the German heavy armor that had dominated the Eastern Front since 1942. To understand why seasoned Tiger crews froze in shock when they encountered the IS-2, you have to go back to a different battlefield and a different summer, when German steel first stunned the Soviet Union. In July 1943, at the Battle of Kursk, the Germans committed hundreds of Panthers, Tigers, and Ferdinand tank destroyers in the largest armored clash in history. The Tiger won. A weighing roughly 57 tons, carried armor up to 100 millimeters thick, and the deadly 88mm gun that could destroy most Soviet tanks well beyond 2,000 meters. Soviet tankers quickly learned a harsh lesson. Standard 76.2mm guns often bounced off the Tiger's frontal armor. To win, they had to flank, ambush, or close to dangerously short distances. The Red Army needed something heavier. The answer began with a family of tanks named after Soviet leader Joseph Stalin. The IS series was designed to combine thick armor with overwhelming firepower. Early models led to the IS-2, which entered service in late 1943 and began appearing in larger numbers during 1944. The IS-2 mounted the massive 122mm D-25T gun. Originally derived from an artillery weapon, it fired shells far larger than those used by most tanks of the war. The gun could fire armor-piercing rounds capable of cracking German heavy armor and high-explosive rounds powerful enough to demolish bunkers, anti-tank guns, and entire buildings. The price for this firepower was a slower rate of fire. Because the ammunition was two-piece, consisting of the projectile and the propellant charge, A skilled loader usually managed only 2 to 3 rounds per minute. But often, one hit was enough. The IS-2 weighed around 46 tons, making it lighter than the Tiger I despite carrying a much larger gun. Its sloped frontal armor increased protection and helped deflect incoming rounds. Later models introduced the improved straight-nose front hull, which offered better ballistic resistance than the earlier stepped design. Inside, the conditions were cramped and exhausting. The commander coordinated targets, the gunner handled the heavy optics and elevation, the loader wrestled with enormous shells, the driver fought the tank through mud and snow, and the bow machine gunner assisted as radio operator. Each 122mm armor-piercing shell weighed roughly 25 kilograms. Lifting and loading these rounds inside a moving tank was punishing work. In combat, the loader often became drenched in sweat, even in freezing weather. But Soviet crews believed in the gun. By 1944, the Red Army had changed dramatically. It was no longer the desperate force of 1941. Soviet crews were better trained. Their logistics were stronger, their artillery coordination was deadly, and their armored units were increasingly confident. When Operation Bagration began on June 22, 1944, the Soviet Union unleashed one of the most devastating offensives of the entire war. The German Army Group Center collapsed under a storm of artillery, aircraft, infantry, and armor. Among the advancing formations were Guards heavy tank regiments equipped with IS-2s. These units were not ordinary tank battalions. They were breakthrough forces. Their mission was to destroy strong points, punch through fortified defenses, and engage German heavy armor. When German crews first saw the IS-2, many were surprised by its shape. It was broad, low, and heavily armored, with a long barrel and a huge muzzle brake. Even stationary, it looked powerful. And when it fired, there was no mistaking it. Veterans described the muzzle blast as a physical shock. Snow erupted around the gun, dust and smoke rolled outward. The report was deep and violent, more like field artillery than a tank cannon. For German crews, used to trading precise 88mm shots, the 122mm shell was deeply unsettling. The Tiger I had built a fearsome reputation since its debut near Leningrad and later in Tunisia. With excellent optics, thick armor, and a powerful gun, it dominated long-range engagements. German commanders such as Michael Wittmann and Otto Karius demonstrated what skilled crews could do with the vehicle. But the Tiger had weaknesses. It was mechanically complex, consumed large amounts of fuel, and required constant maintenance. By late 1944, many units faced shortages of spare parts, experienced mechanics, and trained replacement crews. The Soviet Union, by contrast, was producing tanks in enormous numbers and deploying increasingly capable designs. The IS-2 was not as refined as the Tiger in some respects. German optics were often superior, and the Tiger could usually fire faster. Yet battlefield performance is not determined by one specification. Armor shape, shell effect, crew quality, tactical position, and morale all matter. And morale changes quickly when a shell can destroy your tank with a single hit. One of the best-known accounts of encounters with heavy Soviet tanks comes from Otto Karius, one of Germany's leading tank aces. In his memoir, he described the growing threat posed by Soviet heavy armor and emphasized that underestimating new enemy equipment was dangerous. German crews respected any vehicle capable of surviving the 88mm and delivering a devastating reply. By autumn 1944, such encounters were becoming more common. In the Baltic states, Poland, and East Prussia, German forces increasingly faced Soviet heavy tanks in open country. And winter conditions added another layer of tension. Visibility changed by the minute, snow reflected muzzle flashes, engines struggled in the cold, frost-coated optics. A tank that fired and failed to hit might not get a second chance. At long range, the duel became a contest of nerves. The Tiger commander scanned the horizon through his binoculars. He knew that if he located the enemy first, the 88mm gun could still penetrate many Soviet tanks, but against the IS-2, especially when angled, success was no longer guaranteed. The Soviet commander, meanwhile, often coordinated with artillery and infantry. He used terrain, forests, and ridgelines to conceal his approach. He knew his reload time was slow, so every shot mattered. The gunner waited. The commander whispered the range. The loader heaved the shell into place. Yet the breech slammed shut. The entire tank held its breath. Then the 122mm fired. When an armor-piercing BR-471 round struck, the result was terrifying. Even if the shell failed to penetrate completely, the impact could crack welds, jam the turret, damage internal components, or send fragments of armor spalling through the fighting compartment like razor-sharp metal. Crews sometimes survived the first hit, but emerged shaken and partially deaf. Instruments shattered, lights failed, radios cut out. The psychological effect was enormous. This was why Tiger crews froze in shock. They were facing a tank that challenged one of their deepest assumptions, that they owned the long-range battlefield. A dramatic example of heavy tank combat occurred during the fighting around Sandomierz in Poland in August 1944. Soviet units, and including IS-2 equipped formations, clashed with some of Germany's newest heavy vehicles, including Tiger IIs. In several engagements, Soviet crews demonstrated that careful positioning and disciplined fire could destroy even the heaviest German tanks. The lesson spread quickly. Armor thickness alone was no guarantee of survival. The IS-2 also proved highly effective in urban combat. During the battles for Budapest, Königsberg, and Berlin, its high explosive shells blasted apart fortified buildings and anti-tank positions. German defenders who survived the impact often described entire walls collapsing in a single shot. For Tiger crews, this meant the enemy was dangerous in every environment. On open ground, the IS-2 could kill from long range. In towns, it could tear apart cover. In defensive positions, it acted like mobile artillery. But by January 1945, the Red Army was driving toward the German heartland. The Vistula-Oder offensive began on January 12th with one of the largest artillery bombardments of the war. Thousands of guns thundered across the front. Soviet armor surged through shattered defenses. Guards, heavy tank regiments advanced alongside T-34, 85s, self-propelled guns, engineers, and infantry. German units fought stubbornly, but many were exhausted and under strength. Fuel was scarce, ammunition was limited, roads were crowded with retreating troops and civilians. In this chaos, isolated tank duels became moments of intense psychological pressure. Imagine a Tiger I positioned on the edge of a snow-covered village. The crew has spent the night in freezing temperatures. Their breath fogs the interior, while the commander listens to fragmented radio reports about Soviet breakthroughs. Somewhere ahead, heavy tanks are approaching. At 1,800 meters, the gunner spots movement. A dark shape, broad turret, long barrel. The commander recognizes it at once. IS-2. The Tiger fires first. The 88mm shell streaks across the field and strikes the Soviet tank at an angle. Smoke rises, but the enemy does not stop. The Soviet turret turns slowly. That deliberate movement is more frightening than any shout. The loader in the Tiger forces another shell into the breech. The gunner adjusts. Before he can fire again, the Soviet cannon flashes. The 122mm round crosses the frozen landscape in seconds. Impact. The Tiger rocks violently. The crew is thrown against steel surfaces. The radio crackles and dies. The turret traverse slows. Yet the commander tastes blood where he has bitten his lip. No one speaks. They now understand that they are in a duel where one mistake means destruction. This emotional shock was rooted in years of battlefield experience. German tank crews had often relied on technical superiority and tactical confidence. Facing the IS-2 forced them to reconsider both. That does not mean the IS-2 was invincible. Its slow reload could be exploited. If the first shot missed, a Tiger crew had a narrow but real opportunity to fire multiple rounds in response. Skilled German commanders aimed for weak points such as the lower hull, turret ring, or side armor. Many engagements were decided by visibility, terrain, and crew experience rather than vehicle type alone. But war is as much psychological as mechanical. So a weapon that can destroy you in one hit changes how you think. Soviet tankers understood this. They often emphasized deliberate, aimed fire rather than rapid shooting. Their commanders sought to exploit the fear created by the 122mm gun. When German tanks hesitated, Soviet units pressed the advantage. The IS-2's presence also symbolized the transformation of Soviet industry. Factories in Chelyabinsk and other industrial centers produced heavy tanks under immense pressure. Workers endured long hours, shortages, and constant demands, yet continued delivering vehicles to the front. Each completed tank represented thousands of hours of labor and a national determination to crush the invasion that had begun in 1941. For the crews, the machine was both weapon and shelter. Inside the IS-2, the atmosphere before combat was tense but focused. There the commander leaned over his sighting devices. The driver listened for engine changes. The loader prepared the next round, muscles already aching. The gunner steadied his breathing. They knew German tanks were dangerous. They also knew they carried one of the most powerful tank guns in the world. As Soviet forces advanced into East Prussia and later toward Berlin, the IS-2 repeatedly proved its value. It knocked out bunkers, anti-tank guns, Panthers, Tigers, and fortified positions that lighter tanks struggled to destroy. German soldiers quickly learned to identify its distinctive muzzle blast and massive shell impacts. Some described the experience as being struck by artillery at direct fire range. That description was accurate. The 122mm gun was, in many ways, a field gun mounted in a turret. Or its armor-piercing performance has been debated by historians, but battlefield evidence is clear. At practical combat ranges, the gun was fully capable of disabling or destroying Tiger I tanks, especially through devastating impact effects, even when penetration was incomplete. For the men inside the target, technical arguments meant little. What mattered was the violent shock, the fragments, the smoke, and the realization that their own armor could no longer guarantee survival. By April 1945, IS-2s rolled through the ruins of Berlin. Their guns shattered buildings around the Reichstag and blasted apart last-ditch defenses. The tank that had once shocked German crews on distant snow-covered fields was now operating in the heart of the collapsing Third Reich. The Tiger I, once the symbol of German armored dominance, and had become part of a losing struggle against overwhelming Soviet power. Yet the story is not simply about one tank defeating another. It is about changing momentum. In 1942 and 1943, German heavy tanks often imposed fear on their opponents. By 1944 and 1945, Soviet heavy tanks were returning that fear. When the IS-2 fired from long range and the Tiger crew froze in shock, the moment captured a larger truth about the war on the Eastern Front. The balance had shifted. Industrial strength, tactical experience, and relentless determination were now on the Soviet side. Inside the Tiger, the crew still fought with courage. They loaded, aimed, and returned fire under conditions few people can imagine. Many were veterans who had survived years of brutal combat. Inside the IS-2, Soviet tankers carried the memory of burned cities, lost families, and then comrades killed in earlier campaigns. Their advance westward was driven by both military orders and personal resolve. When these two machines met across frozen ground, steel and explosive power decided the immediate outcome. But history had already begun to decide the larger one. The final image is simple. A Tiger I sits motionless in the snow, armor scarred and smoking. Nearby, shaken crewmen climb from the hatches, stunned that a single distant shot has changed everything. Across the field, an IS-2 advances slowly, its engine rumbling like distant thunder. The loader is already preparing another shell. The commander scans ahead. The gun remains trained on the retreating enemy. The duel is over. The lesson is unforgettable. The era when the Tiger could dominate every opponent is ending. A new giant has arrived, and then even the most experienced German crews can feel it, not just in the torn steel around them, but in the cold realization that the battlefield no longer belongs to them.
If you want more content like this, subscribe now and comment below.